In this edition of the Resilient Professional Podcast, we're going to talk about why it's important to focus on process and not product or final outcome to be a resilient professional. Welcome to the Resilient Professional Podcast. Professional success really is a game of inches. You have the experience and knowledge, but you realize that professional success is more than just knowledge and experience. It's actually applying what you already know. It's about consistently applying what you know in spite of the challenges that are sure to come your way. You know, Olympians know how to battle adversity and to perform at their best, even in the midst of setbacks and frustrations. I think we can learn a lot from the Olympian mindset. It really is about the cultivation of resiliency. Physical resiliency, emotional resiliency, relational resiliency, cognitive resiliency, resiliency in each aspect of our lives. On a regular basis, we'll unpack these ideas through guest speakers and podcast material that will take you to the next level of professional success. Hi everyone, Sean Humphreys here. Welcome to the Resilient Professional Podcast. Well, in this podcast, we're going to talk about the process, not the product, is important. It doesn't mean our ultimate goals aren't important, but it's very important that we don't get lost on the fact that the process is vitally important. This podcast is a continuation from a previous podcast drawn from the ideas from the book, The Practicing Mind. And I'll link to the show notes of this podcast, the previous one that tied into some general themes and a bit of an introduction to this topic. What's a paradox of life? One of the paradoxes is the problem with patience and discipline is that it requires both of them to develop each of them. That's so true. So when we place too much of our focus on the final outcome of anything we do, we may rob ourselves of the calming effect and peace of mind that actually flows from being focused on the actual process of accomplishing our goals. So what could be the difference between people experiencing flow, to being in the zone, and those who are in the frustration zone? And very often the difference between those two groups of people is practice and how they handle the whole notion of practice in accomplishing their goals. So how do we define practice? Well, it's the deliberate repetition of a process with the intention of reaching a very specific goal. The words deliberate and the word practice are absolutely critical to that definition. So practice implies learning, but learning doesn't necessarily imply practice. Let's unpack that a little more. For example, a good, mechanical efforts around, let's say, a violin or being a golfer or any other kinds of activities, even being a good writer, does require intentional practice and staying in the process and doing something and being aware of whether or not you're actually accomplishing something in the moment. And this requires a bit of letting go. It requires letting go of the end result and just focusing on the here and now, deliberate practice. How can I become better at what I'm currently doing? The author makes an interesting comment that life, the goal of life is not accomplishing goals. The goal of life is to live life. And we live life through those goal accomplishments, but just achieving goals is not the end result or the key goal we should have in our life. And yet we sometimes, I think, growing up in a Western culture, think that's what life is all about, is the accomplishment of goals. And although that's important, that shouldn't be the main reason we're living life. And so I think it's something to ponder. The irony is that when you focus on process and not on the end result, it's basically the product looks after itself. It's about being in the present moment and the here and now, and not in the past and not in the future. And that unleashes a huge amount of energy so we can be focused and present. This means giving up all of our attachment to the final result and being focused on the goal at hand. So the goal, bottom line, move from the product focus, the ultimate outcome of your goal, to focus on process. The result is that pressure will begin to dissipate, frustration will be lowered, and you have more of a calm, deliberate energy that you can use to focus on the here and now steps you need to take to ultimately reach your goals. It's really a true shift of focusing, from what you're doing right now to become aware of your inner chatter. And as you become more aware of your inner chatter and begin to marshal that focus and that chatter to your current goals, you will gradually become more and more experiencing an inner calm. As opposed to our minds being distracted and all over the place, we begin to marshal that energy and that focus. So if you focus on outcomes, it's very easy to feel frustrated. It's very easy to get disheartened. It's one of the reasons why process focus is so important, because if you focus on outcomes all the time and you benchmark yourself against where you are compared to where you want to be, that can create some rocket fuel to help you move in the right direction. But I think on an ongoing basis, it can create frustrations if you're not careful. So it's very important we focus on those steps today to help us accomplish our goals. So when you focus on the process and being in the present, there are no mistakes and no judgment. It just becomes learning and tweaking and changing and making adjustments along the way. So like I said, it's about actively observing and making adjustments. And that tends to take the emotion out of the process because you're not engaged in judging. It's about effectively redirecting your very precious energy to the current task at hand. Now, this doesn't mean that goals aren't important. They're vitally important to the process, but it shouldn't be the way you benchmark your daily activities. Your goals act as a rudder to steer you in the right direction, but not as a way of valuing the here and now. So it's a rudder. It's like a compass. It's like a lighthouse to keep you moving in the right direction. But on a regular basis, you need to focus on process. Now, this is a very hard thing to do because it's likely the final goal or outcome is what you got involved you in this process in the first place. But you need to put those goals or outcomes in the proper perspective. So judgment redirects and wastes our energy. And if you focus on the present moment for any activity, you experience a little more calm, inner peace, over time mastery, and self-confidence. Now, there's a lot of reasons why this is hard for us. Likely it's partly just human nature. This may be why most faith systems around the world have emphasized things like prayer and meditation to pull people, out of this frantic activity of life to disengage a little bit and just be in the here and now. As well, our culture continues to tell us that it's only the end result, the end product, that matters, whether it's more sales, better grades, higher SAT scores, more income, and larger net worth. But it's important to keep in mind that Japan became a dominant manufacturing giant, focusing on process. They were amazing at it, and it really lifted their country economically by focusing on process. And so as a culture, I think we have to become much more obsessed with having an impact and a focus on the here and now. One of the ironies of life is that diligent practice and daily focus on process, which of course will ultimately lead us to our long-term goals, will give us a sense of joy and accomplishment that when things come easily to us, we never get. So let's summarize some of the main points that have come out of this discussion today. So I guess the first point is keep yourself process-oriented. We live in a culture that focuses on the ultimate outcome, the ultimate goals. And although those things are important, the most important thing, if you want to really accomplish things in a focused, intentional way, is to focus on the process. Number 2, stay in the present. Again, don't be worrying about the regrets of the past or the concerns about the future. Yes, from time to time we do need to focus on the future, but to get things accomplished, you really do need to stay in the present as much as possible. Number 3, make the process the goal. Focus most of your time on building out a supportive, robust process, an environment that facilitates and encourages a good process, and use the overall goals that you have to be the rudder, to steer your effort. But don't always make that your focus. Now, like I said, it's a critical importance to have goals. Those things inspire us and create energy, and obviously those are important things we want to get done. But they are important rudders day to day to focus our process and activities. And number 4, be diligent and have intention. It's not just about putting in time and just about being in the here and now. You have to pay attention. You need to look for ways of improving your process and to be intentional around that exercise to try to get better at what you do. You don't want to be looking back 5 years from now being no more productive, no more effective because you were a little bit mindless when you're going through the process on a day-to-day basis. And if you do those things, it'll help to eliminate judgments and negativity and frustrations that bleed away emotion, and positive emotion, to keep you from being effective day to day. So you know that you're moving out of that focusing zone, that process-oriented here and now zone, when you start to become impatient or frustrated or judging. So you want to make sure that you're on an ongoing basis, you're paying attention to that inner chatter, and that you nudge yourself back into the present. So the paradox of patience and discipline is it takes both to develop each of them. And we talked about that at the beginning of the podcast. So I wish you all the best in your journey towards being a resilient professional, and hopefully you can find ways you can apply this notion of process and being present to your day-to-day activities so you can be effective to ultimately accomplish those goals and objectives that you have. Well, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the Resilient Professional Podcast. For more resources about being a resilient professional, both personally and professionally, be sure to visit our website at www.takechargeofchange.com. As well, be sure to download the ebook, The Resilient Professional, for all kinds of tips and strategies and worksheets to take you on that journey towards being a resilient professional. All the best in your professional journey.